Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to the Pleasure Points Podcast. I'm your host, James Rohr. Thank you so much for being here. Let's dive right in, shall we? Because there's so much that is going on in the world with all of the coronavirus discussions. And as I was walking the other day and thinking about it, I was thinking this whole podcast actually came about because Jen and I, a long time ago, we did this, like the questions of developing intimacy. Like these people, I think I've talked about this before, but these researchers devised a way. They said, we could put together a series of questions and we could have two total strangers come together and they answer these questions together, and they will, have a level of intimacy that they don't have with most people. All right. And the questions are broken up into like three different sections. And one of the questions was something like, if you knew you were going to die in 2 years, like what would you do? Or if you knew you were going to die in a year, like what would you do? And then the question was like, okay, and so why haven't you done that, right? And at the time, my answer was like, well, I would write a book or something. Like for Wyatt, I would write him letters so that he could, if he decided later on that he gave a shit about his dad, that he could listen to it or, read it and have a sense of like where I was coming from, right? Because at the time, I think he was like 3 or 4, right? So I was like, well, one day he might be like, I want to learn about my dad. I guess if you live long enough, maybe that interest starts to disappear. And so I was like, well, I could write, but then I thought maybe a podcast would be fun. So that's really like where this whole thing came from. So there's a lot of times when I'm just kind of like going about my day and I'm thinking to myself, like if I were to, share something with Wyatt, like information that he may not be able to handle yet, but if he were older and a teenager and if I wasn't there, what would be something that I would share with him? And I was thinking about this coronavirus and these flu shots and just like the whole gambit of like vaccines and just all this stuff. And the thought that I observed myself having was, don't think for a second that the government wouldn't use you as an experiment. So the government, and whether it's big pharma or the industrial military complex, like for sure they will use their citizens as they will experiment on their citizens. They will do these experimentations in order to, whether it's biological warfare, whether it's, testing treatments. I mean, there's just such a long history of that. I mean, the Tuskegee Airmen come to mind, right? And so that was like the thought that came up. And, with the stuff, whether it's, was it like a weaponized biological warfare laboratory in China where this disease or this virus escaped from? I don't know. There's a lot to dive into there, and I feel like some of this stuff with like the fear of China seems like a little intense, a little xenophobic, and yet it also seems to me that like for sure the government would be willing to experiment on us, whether it's willingly or sort of by accident because they're creating this crazy shit on our homeland. But it reminds me of a client that I used to have who passed away, and I've never been able to verify his story, but what he said was that a long time ago he got this horrible like arthritis, this terrible joint pain. It was so bad, he had to go into the hospital. And when I knew him, his joints were like incredibly deformed. So like the fingers and the toes were like really misshapen. And he said it was from this sudden onset of this like kind of like intense form of arthritis. And he said that when he was there in the hospital, this guy was an attorney. When he was in the hospital, his assistant was there, and they were talking, and these two men in suits came by, right? It's like some Men in Black kind of thing. These two men in suits came by, and they said, excuse me, Mr. Have you spent a lot of time in the Washington Dulles airport recently? And he was like, yeah, I've been flying in and out of there like almost 5 days a week for the last like 3 weeks as he was flying around to different clients and stuff. And they said, okay. And they took a look at his charts and they said, that's all. And they left. And so this guy looks at his assistant and he's like, what in the fuck was that? Like, what just happened? And so they started doing some digging, and it turns out that there were a number of people that had come down with the same kind of symptoms. And supposedly there was a class action lawsuit that was filed against the government. And he said that the government settled, without assuming any kind of guilt. But that basically, the story that he told me was that they were pumping some sort of particulate matter through the ducts of Dulles Airport, trying to, see kind of at what dosage and at what exposure would the impact be that happens on the people. So, I don't know. It's just one story. This guy, could spin quite a yarn, but at the same time, like, there was no agenda to lie to me. I mean, the guy's dead now. But it was it's something that I think about often, and with some Navy SEALs that I've met over the years, it's all anecdotal, of course, right? No one's going to come right out and admit it, but yeah, that was just kind of an interesting thought that I had when I was walking back home the other day and thinking about all of this stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, for sure. Like, we are all guinea pigs. I mean, you look at asbestos, you look at the cigarette smoking, you look at lead in the paint. It's like there's the technological advances that happen. People think that they're innovating, and they are. And then, we find out later that it's, things that we thought were safe aren't so safe. So, is it like a malicious experimenting? Like, perhaps and perhaps not. Sometimes we just discover things, whether we're going to find that out about 5G or, just like cell phones in our pockets or Wi-Fi. I mean, who knows? But for sure, we're definitely doing things now that future generations are going to look back and be like, that was bonkers. Like, what was wrong with you guys? How could you not see all of the damage that was happening there? My God, why are we... How did I get out of this topic? Sorry for that rant. An interesting start, considering what I really wanted to talk about here today was this kind of new feeling of appreciation that I've kind of stumbled upon, that I wanted to share with you, that I think that, for me, it's really revolutionized how I'm seeing the world and how I'm interacting with things right now. And, certainly when it comes to your relationships, like, this is a trait that I think is, something to really have a high up on the value system there. But man, this start is interesting. We went to, Jen and I and some friends of ours went to a comedy show last night. We saw this guy, Chad Daniels, who's hysterical. I didn't know who he was, but he was super funny. But he starts the show with addressing the audience, because in the feature act that was before him, the opener, there was this heckler. This guy was hammered, and he was like heckling. The guy had a bit about the word moist, and this guy from the audience just kept yelling moist, moist, moist. It was so awkward and horrible. And so Chad comes out and he starts his set by just like laying into this guy and like talking all this shit about the audience. It was really funny because he was like, oh my God. He's like, this is why I try not to watch the feature act, because I don't want to hate the audience before I even get up on the stage. And he's like, where do you go from here? He's like, I've already like shamed you guys into submission. And here I came in here, I was going to talk about like, love and relating to life in a good way. And we're talking conspiracy theories and the government, not necessarily respecting everyone's right to a healthy life. Anyway, so what's been happening as I've, I don't know, I've been listening to a lot of Alan Watts and really taking like my meditations and attentiveness to the next level recently. And, you guys, if you've listened to these last few podcasts, you've heard some of this progression. And what has really struck me in the last few weeks is like how much energy I have put into trying to like see or sense the invisible, and you guys have heard some of the fun stories and like even in my love, like for Joe Dispenza and his work and, this like diving deep into these kind of like quantum fields, even though I don't know that, modern researchers would agree so much with what they're saying about the quantum field. But, you're diving into that and you're talking about manifestation and attraction and all of these things. And it's easy to get your head just kind of wrapped up in like stuff that's totally invisible and made up stories. I mean, even religion. That's good. I just shit on the government. Now let's talk about religion. Even religion, right? It's like we get sort of these extensive stories of, heaven and hell and God and, sort of the invisible hands of justice. And, whether you're talking about karma and people are like, oh, his karma is going to catch up with him and all of this stuff, or like even the idea that if you live a good enough life here, then you don't have to come back, like this reincarnation and breaking that reincarnation cycle. Now, I'm not a scholar in that stuff, but even just kind of casually thinking about it, it's like, I don't like it. It's not something that resonates with me. It's not that I don't like it. It's just like, it doesn't feel like the truth to me, where that there's some part of like mastering this life. And then the reward is that you don't have to come back here anymore, as if this was like some sort of playground where you serve your sentence here. It doesn't make sense to me. And so, but I've been really paying attention to how much energy and thought and attention I have put into things that are invisible, whether it's because I'm trying to, grasp an emotion or call something into my life, or to, divine something that's going on in the ether. And I've really been focusing in the last few weeks on just focusing on like what is here? What can I see? All right, honoring my feelings and the way that I interact with the world, but really just like keeping it super tangible and trying my best to keep it as present as possible. And if I find myself drifting off into a story, to just catch that and to come back. And what I've been discovering, especially when I take this out into nature, but even in my home, right, is that like, and the best moments, what it fills me with is this sense of awe. And that is the thing that, like, if you wanted to experiment with some homework this week, right, would be that, is to think about and to come into this state of awe. And when was the last time you really let yourself just be consumed with wonder or gratitude? But even gratitude, like, it doesn't even have to be gratitude. Of course, we know that gratitude can raise your emotional state and shift out of shame and fear. And gratitude is like, it's like the amazing sort of life hack. But even the gratitude, it's like, what are you giving gratitude for? Like, who's it going to? And so instead, to just like really allow myself to come into a state of awe, into a state of wonder. And, like I've certainly done that. I'm sure we all have. Like, if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, like, you're like, whoa, this is huge and it's grand. And like, when I'm out in nature, I'm better about it. But I've really been focusing on like bringing that into the home and finding more moments in and around, like in the normal life, to just allow myself to be filled with awe. And it's been easier this week because we've got orchids that are blooming, which is like awesome. Like, I've never had an orchid that's like, it's got the flowers on and then the flowers drop, and then I don't know what that phase is called, where it's like dormant or something. And I've never kept an orchid like the whole time. But we've done that in the last year here. And so we've got all these orchids that are all starting to bloom now. And it's like the coolest thing ever. I mean, orchids are amazing. And to just like take in like the miracle of that life, like without any other story to it, without thinking about how like God divined it, or like it's the karma of the flower that is opening up, like none of that. Just allowing myself to become totally in touch with the fact that, like, as far as we know, we are made of like particles and, carbon and all of these like atoms and neutrons and electrons and like the sort of the raw substance of this planet. And that somehow it has happened that these compounds have arranged themselves in such a way that like this life has happened. It's amazing. It's amazing. And it can be just that. Like, there doesn't have to be any other story or purpose or like divine calling beyond that. Like, we could write that story, and a lot of people write that story and they write it really well, for it serves them in their life, whether it's, for positive health things, or if they want to stay trapped and enslaved in, some kind of victim mode. But Like we don't even like just to allow, like I've been really just thinking about like how great, how incredible is it that like I have a body that can feel and that sometimes hurts and sometimes is joyous and sometimes is sad and sometimes gets hungry. And that like of all of the things that could have happened in the world, of all of the things that happened before my birth that allowed this life form to happen, that it's happening. Like, whoa. And what I've been feeling as I've been in this state is like this easing of tension and like, I don't know how to say it. I talked a few weeks ago about like how my vision seems to be changing, and there is very much this thing where my focus is becoming so much more tangible. It's so much more like what's in front of me and what is here, instead of like all of the extraneous like thoughts and things and anticipations of the future and outcomes that will never be, and you know, the stories of the past. And as Alan Watts says, you know, like your experience of the past is still something that is generated in this moment. It's a memory that is created in this moment again and again. You know, and that's not to say that we don't have all sorts of, you know, I'm sure future generations are going to discover all sorts of things that are currently invisible to us that some of us may be feeling and empaths may sense and the intuitive ones are picking up. And, you know, when the Wind Ghost Speak episodes happen and that stuff comes in, it's like, you know, they'll probably get a better handle and a better understanding of like, from one perspective anyway, of like what's actually going on there. But to just surrender to the experience of being, and to bring to that a sense of awe. And for me, like I've really just like letting myself breathe into that and to stay as much as I can in that space. You know, and it might sound sort of impractical, but like, well, whatever, like we get to decide what's practical. And so, you know, it's like, can you have awe of the mess that you've made? Can you have awe over, you know, the beautiful houseplants or the orchids, or like just the fact that you have water that runs out of a tap, you know, and hopefully it doesn't take us to have a near-death experience or to lose somebody close to us to nurture that, you know, and I would imagine there's plenty of books that talk about this, but, you know, and some of these relationship books and, you know, the self-help, all that bullshit, you know, I haven't encountered somebody really just talking about the importance of awe. And in fact, where my head goes is to poetry, you know, and one of my favorite poets from a long time ago was Walt Whitman. And he was perhaps a little bombastic, but I loved it. You know, the Leaves of Grass, the Song of Myself, and, you know, it's like Song of the Open Road. Like these are amazing, epic poems. And his like just the love and the celebration of what is there, instead of, you know, adding all of these layers and layers and layers, or like, you know, pining and divining and I don't know, like trying to wrangle with the wind. Instead, it's like, let's just feel it. Let's just be in awe of it. Knowing, as he says, right, that there's much here unseen as well. But instead of trying to like write a story about what's unseen, we could just accept the fact that, yeah, there's a lot that we don't know, and that's okay. And instead, I'm gonna taste my food. I'm gonna drink the wine and the beverage, and I'm gonna be, you know. And when it comes to, the reason I'm talking about this is because it came up on, I mean, there's so many threads here, but it came up with my coaching clients the other day on our team call, on our group call, where it's like, you know, some of them were finishing the program, and, you know, it's like sort of what's the final thought for them to send them on their way in a good way. And it's like, if we can come back and have awe at our life and our own existence, taking a time to like feel your heartbeat. You know, I led them through this whole meditation, right, where you progressively relax the body and then you come eventually into the heart. And tuning into the heart, feeling your heartbeat. Taking a moment to appreciate like that you have cardiac tissue, that you have cardiac muscles, that it works, that it beats. And to really tune into the fact that it's been beating your whole life. And just the miracle of that. Your flesh, your bones, animated by some kind of circuitry, some sort of experience, life force, chi, whatever, has led you to be you. And to bring that awe and to appreciate the drumbeat calling you back home. It doesn't stop until it does. And to have that sense of wonder. And if we can especially bring that sense of wonder to our own existence, all right, then hopefully we can also have that for those around us. But it's going to be very difficult to have it for those around us if we don't have it for ourselves. All right, and so to tap into that, like, can I cultivate just an amazing sense of appreciation and awe that I even exist? And that then looking across the table with whatever company you're keeping, can we have awe and appreciation that they are who they are? All right, this is kind of a response or an opportunity to diffuse the need to be right and the judgment and the thinking that we know how things should be and how people should be living. And instead to just be like, oh, look at that. That's the game they're playing. That's the costume they're wearing. All right, that's the face that they're putting out into the world right now. And to laugh at our own absurdity. And to just be in a state of awe of all of it. And then how might our relationships be different if we have that sense of awe for ourselves and a sense of awe for others? And just to practice it, to be in that state. Meditate with your eyes open. Take a look around. Fall in love with the artwork around your home. Notice the colors dancing across the wall. Listen to the sounds. Right? So this reminds me of a story of the first time I was on a vision quest, which is this Native American ceremony where you basically go out into the woods. And I was with some friends of mine, and we went out to this island, this small island in the middle of Lake Superior. And we took this like long boat ride to get out there, and we had the whole island to ourselves, this island with this lighthouse. And I don't know, I think there were 5 or 6 of us or whatever that were vision questing. And so we each sort of ventured off to find our spot where we were going to be fasting and, just paying attention, being in nature, right? There's lots of layers to the ceremony. It's like one of my absolute favorites. And I remember that first time. So this was like at the height of like the trees were talking to me. I'd seen auras, like I'd had all this stuff. I was like in the middle of like that overachieving drive. I wanted to be the best spiritual little fucking person that I could be. Oh man, it's intense to think about this sometimes. And so I was just like feeling, now I remember like that drive, right? And so I found the spot in the woods. It was like, I don't know, I hiked for like an hour and a half to find it. And I set up, and I remember the whole time that I was there, I kept like looking around and waiting for like some invisible hand to like touch me, or like some sort of spirit or like something to appear and to, for like the heavens to open and for, some sort of like spiritual thing of major consequence to happen. And nothing like that happened, or so I thought at the time. What did happen when I was there was at one point there was a hawk that was on a tree, I don't know, maybe like 20 yards behind where I was sitting, and it screamed, let out its, bird of prey yell, and the scream, and it echoed, reverberated across the whole island. A buddy of mine that was there said he heard it, and it dove right over my tent. Right, it was right over where I was praying, where I was sitting. Like buzzed right over my head and flew away. And then what also happened was it turned out that where the site that I had chosen was right across from a creek. And there were a bunch of beavers that came out and they were building the beaver dam. And so I got to sit and I was watching them build their beaver dam. And then at one point I did have I had a terrible nightmare, which was crazy. But and then of course when you're there, I was in the woods and, there's ants and there's spiders and there's just all of this nature to observe and to appreciate. But instead, so much of my memory was focused on being oh yeah, the hawk flew over. Okay, whatever, and then waiting for something else more magical or more mysterious to happen. Missing the opportunity to be in total awe of the fact that here are beavers going about their work and I'm here. I'm part of the cycle. I'm doing my best to return to the fire of creation. And I'm being summoned by hawk or whatever. The hawk is just screaming. What the fuck? I don't know what's happening. I could write a story about it, but there was a hawk and there was a beaver and there were spiders and there's all sorts of things. And there was such an opportunity to just be in awe of that. If I could go back, I would go back and just be like, Jimmy, just breathe into how magnificent this opportunity is to just sit in nature, knowing that some people that you care an awful lot about and that care about you are also here on this island doing the same thing with you. And that just the fact that you're here and breathing, that's enough. And there's nothing else that needs to be divined, right? Be in awe of nature and to know that you are part of nature. And so I've been, as I've been feeling this shifting, I've been doing a lot of thinking about, not in a bad way, but what was the cost of looking for the invisible instead of just allowing myself to be enraptured with what is before me? To a certain extent, I suppose it parallels consumerism, right? Chasing what you don't have yet versus celebrating what you do. But to be in that state of just coming back to a state of awe and wonder. So, it's nice. That got kind of heavy there, right? But why is we're just talking about having a good time and appreciating what is. So, that's the podcast for today. Thank you guys, as always, for being here. You can hit up the show, pleasurepointspodcast@gmail. Follow me on Instagram @JamesERoar. You can see the coaching work at invitinginlove.com. We've got all the things. I love you guys, and I hope that you have an awesome day and an awe-filled day and week. And as always, I love to hear what you think of the podcast, so hit me up. If you haven't subscribed, the subscriptions on iTunes are really, really helpful. And if you love the show, please write a review. So thank you so much. We'll catch you next time.